Chapter 1. The copper taste of blood flooded Odelia's mouth. She hit the cobblestones hard. Dirt coated her bruised cheek as another booted foot connected with her ribs. Pain flared, sharp and blinding, but she did not cry out. She simply curled tighter around the bundle of crushed healing herbs clutched to her chest. Scentless trash, a local alpha spat, his boots scraping against the dirt, a useless, broken thing stealing from her betters. The crowd gathered around the market square laughed. They enjoyed the cruelty. To them, she was an anomaly, a shifter without the scent of a wolf, a girl without a pack, existing only as a target for their primal frustrations. Odelia kept her eyes on the ground. She forced her breathing to slow. The wild, lethal thing buried deep within her blood thrashed against its cage. It begged to be let out. It begged to tear these men into ribbons. She bit her lip until it bled, holding the monster back. A sudden deafening roar silenced the market. The earth trembled beneath Odelia's palms. The crowd parted like water. A towering carriage crafted from polished obsidian rolled into the square. The royal crest of the Alpha King gleamed on its doors. The imposing dire wolf pulling the carriage snapped its jaws, halting the procession. The carriage door opened. King Vigo stepped onto the dirt. He was a monument of ruthless power. Dark armor clung to his broad shoulders. A fur cloak cascaded down his back. His amber eyes swept over the terrified crowd, cold and absolute. Then his gaze snagged on Odelia. He stopped. The wind shifted. Vigo inhaled. His heart performed a violent, unexpected stutter. He caught a scent. It did not smell like a human, nor did it hold the musky signature of a wolf. It smelled of midnight rain, crushed lavender, and ancient iron. It was a scent that made the wolf beneath his skin claw frantically at his ribs. Mine, his beast snarled. Take her. Hide her. Vigo fought the sudden terrifying urge to drop to his knees. He masked his inner turmoil behind a wall of frost. What is the meaning of this disruption? Vigo demanded. His voice was dark velvet wrapped around a blade. The local alpha dropped to his knees, trembling. My king. She is a thief, a scentless freak. Vigo stepped closer to Odelia. He looked down at her battered form. The rational part of his mind demanded he leave this insignificant dispute, yet his boots remained planted. The intoxicating scent wrapped around his senses, dragging him under. He needed her in his fortress. He needed her where he could see her. Chain her, Vigo ordered his guards, his tone devoid of emotion. Bring her to the Obsidian Court. I will question this thief myself. Odelia's stomach plummeted. Her carefully constructed decade of hiding was unraveling in seconds. The royal guards hauled her to her feet, fastening cold iron cuffs around her wrists. Hours later, she was thrown onto the freezing stone floor of the Obsidian Court. The colossal iron doors slammed shut, sealing her inside. Footsteps echoed in the cavernous hall. Vigo approached, the scrape of his boots deliberate and slow. The rasp of steel filled the silence. Vigo drew his sword. He slid the cold tip of the blade under her chin, forcing her to look up. His amber eyes burned with a chaotic mixture of wrath and undeniable hunger. Tell me, Vigo whispered, the words scraping against the stone walls. What abomination are you? If she shifts, she dies. But if she doesn't, she'll lose everything. Which fate would you choose? Drop your answer below, and don't miss what happens when she faces the Alpha King. Chapter 2. The towering shadows of the Obsidian Court stretched across the vaulted ceiling. The Council of Elders sat upon their elevated thrones, peering down at Odelia like vultures evaluating a carcass. She is a spy, the the Supreme Elder proclaimed, his voice echoing with disdain. A creature cloaked in deceit. Let the truth ritual peel away her lies. Above them, a harsh caw interrupted the solemnity. Barnaby, a scruffy black crow with a chipped beak, swooped down from the rafters. He opened his talons, dropping a rusted iron key directly onto the helm of Captain Garrick. The metal clanged loudly. Garrick swatted at the bird with a muttered curse, his face flushing dark red. Despite her binds, the ghost of a smirk touched Odelia's lips. Barnaby always tried to help, even when his timing was atrocious. "Begin the ritual," the Supreme Elder commanded, ignoring the bird. The court mage stepped forward. In his hand he held a whip, woven from silver wire and crackling spell fire. Odelia braced herself. She locked her jaw. She anchored her mind to the cold stone beneath her knees. The whip struck. Agony exploded across her shoulders. The spell fire bit into her skin like acid. Odelia gasped, but she swallowed the scream forming in her throat. She breathed through the sharp copper taste filling her mouth. She would not shift. She would not let the monster out. On the obsidian throne, Vigo gripped the carved stone armrests. His knuckles turned white. As the second lash fell upon Odelia's back, a phantom line of fire burned across his own skin. He flinched. The mate bond, ancient and undeniable, was awakening. It tied her pain directly to his nervous system. His inner wolf raged, pacing wildly against the confines of his mind, demanding he slaughter the mage. "Stop them," his beast roared. "Protect her." Vigo clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. He was the Alpha King. He could not show weakness. He could not halt a sacred trial for a suspected spy. He watched her endure the third strike, and his chest felt as though it were caving in. She did not scream. She did not beg. Her resilience was a terrifying, beautiful thing. "She does not break," the court mage panted, lowering the whip. "And she does not shift. She hides her true nature." The Supreme Elder stood. He pointed a withered finger at Odelia's bleeding form. "If the whip cannot extract the truth, the beasts will. I sentence this spy to the Blood Moon Pit. Tomorrow night we shall see what form she takes when faced with death." He should have sentenced her the moment she stepped inside. So why hasn't he? Whatever he sensed in her, it's not normal, and when it finally breaks free, the entire court will regret it. Chapter 3 is where the truth starts to surface. Chapter 3. The Blood Moon Pit smelled of old rust and despair. The circular arena was enclosed by towering iron grates, trapping Odelia on the sand below. The audience roared from the balconies, thirsty for violence. A subterranean crawler slithered from the holding gates. It was a nightmare, composed of jagged teeth, pale, eyeless flesh, and hooked claws. It hissed, tasting the air for her blood. Odelia fell into a defensive stance. She could not use her true strength. If she tore this beast apart with her bare hands, the court would know she was a monster. She had to rely purely on agility. The crawler lunged. Odelia dove to the side. Sand kicked up into her eyes. The beast's jaws snapped inches from her face. She rolled, pushing off the ground, her muscles burning with the effort of holding her true speed in check. She breathed in the metallic tang of the arena, keeping her eyes fixed on the creature's erratic movements. High above, Vigo sat upon his throne. His posture was rigid. His amber eyes tracked her every desperate dodge. The stone armrest, beneath his right hand, began to fracture under his crushing grip. Dust trickled from the cracked rock. "Give the order, my king," Garrick whispered, leaning close. "Let the archers end her suffering before the beast feasts." Vigo said nothing. His silence was a taut wire ready to snap. He was fighting a war inside his own mind. The rational king demanded he let the trial conclude. The mated wolf demanded he tear the arena apart to reach her. Every time her eyes darted upward to meet his, the slow-burn tension between them pulled tighter. Her gaze held fierce reproach. His gaze held a desperate, suffocating possessiveness. Down in the pit, Odelia stumbled. The crawler seized the opening. Its hooked claws swept out in a vicious arc, raking across Odelia's spine. Her tunic tore. Her skin parted. But crimson blood did not flow. Instead, a blinding, violent violet light bled from the open wound. The crowd gasped in collective horror. Beneath the torn flesh, midnight black, iridescent scales pushed their way to the surface, glittering under the torchlight. The arena erupted into shrieks of terror. Chapter 4. Vigo's restraint shattered. The human facade vanished entirely. Bones elongated and shifted in a blur of motion. A colossal black wolf, wrapped in midnight shadow, vaulted over the balcony railing. He plummeted into the arena, landing with an earth-shaking impact. The crawler hissed, turning toward the new threat. Vigo did not hesitate. He lunged, his jaws clamped around the crawler's throat, crushing windpipe and scale in one brutal bite. Dark blood sprayed across the sand. He tossed the lifeless carcass aside and turned immediately to Odelia. He shifted back to his human form, ignoring the gasps from the audience above. He unfastened his velvet and fur cloak, wrapping it tightly around Odelia's trembling, scaled back. He scooped her into his arms, holding her against his chest. Barnaby fluttered down from the high arches. He landed on the dead crawler, cawing harshly at the king, scolding him for his reckless display. Vigo ignored the bird. He carried Odelia out of the pit, his strides eating up the distance to the royal wing. In the king's private bedchamber, the firelight cast warm, golden shadows across the silk sheets. The room smelled of cedar wood and dying embers. Vigo sat at the edge of the mattress. He held a warm, damp cloth, carefully wiping the violet blood from Odelia's skin. The sexual tension in the room was a thick, suffocating blanket. Every brush of his fingers sent a jolt of electricity through Odelia's veins. The scent of pine and impending rain rolling off him made her breath catch. His touch was unbearably gentle. It broke down the walls she had spent a decade building. "You should not have done that," Odelia whispered, her voice trembling. She pressed her hands against his chest, trying to push him away. "Stay away from me. I am dangerous." Vigo caught her wrists. He pulled her hands away, leaning in until his lips hovered mere inches from hers. "You are mine," he murmured, the words vibrating against her mouth. "I do not fear the dark." Before the moment could go further, a loud banging at the door broke the spell. Garrick's muffled voice called out, demanding an audience. Vigo growled in frustration. He stood, pulling the blanket over Odelia, and stepped out into the hall to confront his captain. Inside the room, the shadows along the far wall began to detach themselves. 3 assassins, draped in black, stepped into the firelight. Chapter 5. Blades glinted coldly in the hearthlight. Odelia scrambled backward across the bed, pulling the velvet cloak tight against her chest. The heavy oak doors swung open. Vigo rushed back into the room, sensing the shift in the air. One of the assassins spun around. He hurled a small hex-glass vial directly at the king's chest. The glass shattered like ice. A wave of freezing blue magic exploded outward. Vigo's muscles locked instantly. He dropped heavily to his knees, paralyzed but fully conscious. His amber eyes burned with helpless fury. The assassins turned their blades back toward Odelia. Seeing Vigo fall flipped a switch in Odelia's mind. The mate bond, still fragile but violently protective, demanded blood. The cage inside her mind vanished. Agony ripped through her body as her bones snapped and lengthened. The velvet cloak shredded into pieces. Towering wings of leathery shadow unfurled from her back, casting monstrous silhouettes against the walls. A long, segmented tail, ending in a curved stinger, dripping with translucent venom, whipped through the air. She grew into a terrifying hybrid, the body of a colossal wolf, the wings of a bat, the tail of a scorpion. She was a manticore wolf, an ancient, extinct legend brought to life. She moved faster than the eye could track. Claws tore through armor. Teeth snapped bones. Her venomous tail struck the final assassin, the poison sizzling as it burned through his veins. In seconds, the threat was reduced to absolute carnage. Odelia stood panting, her dark scales slick with blood. She looked down at Vigo, waiting for the disgust. She waited for him to look at her with the same revulsion the world always offered monsters. But Vigo's eyes held no fear. Even paralyzed, his gaze devoured her. His amber eyes burned with awe, reverence, and an absolute terrifying possessiveness. He looked at her as if she were a goddess of death, and he was her most devoted worshipper. The double doors burst open once more. The Supreme Elder, flanked by a dozen heavily armed guards, stepped into the bedchamber. They froze, staring in horrified silence at the mythical monster standing over a pool of shredded corpses. Chapter 6. Panic seized the elders. The Supreme Elder began chanting in a forgotten tongue. Rings of glowing golden glyphs erupted from the floorboards. The magic hummed with the sharp scent of ozone. The rings shot upward, snapping tightly around Odelia's massive paws and pinning her leathery wings to her sides. She thrashed against the bindings. She roared, a sound that shook the dust from the ceiling rafters, but the magic held fast. "Execute the calamity, my king," the Supreme Elder demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the bound beast. "She is a ruinous myth. Slay her before she destroys Obsidian." Barnaby chose that exact moment to swoop through the broken window. He plummeted toward Garrick, dropping a crumpled, blood-stained parchment into the captain's hands. The paper smelled of cheap wax and copper. Garrick unfurled it, his eyes widening as he read the contents. "These are the Elder's seals," Garrick shouted over Odelia's roaring. "The council funded these assassins. They planned to kill the king." Vigo fought the paralysis binding his limbs. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The mate bond screamed in his head, a frantic, bleeding siren urging him to move. He was caught between the collapsing stability of his crown and the bound, roaring woman who held his soul. The Supreme Elder sneered, realizing his treason was exposed. He reached beneath his robes and drew a jagged spear. The weapon hummed with a sickly green light, weeping with lethal dragon venom. "If the king is too weak to slay the beast, I shall do it for the realm," the Elder shouted. He hurled the venomous spear straight toward Odelia's exposed, bound chest. Chapter 7. Vigo's alpha will shattered the magical ice in his veins. With a guttural shout, he propelled himself forward. He dove directly into the path of the flying weapon. The spear struck him with a sickening thud, burying itself deep into his abdomen. Vigo crashed to the stone floor, gasping as the green venom immediately began burning through his blood. Odelia's heart stopped. A roar of pure, unadulterated anguish tore from her throat. The sound was so devastating it shattered the stained glass windows lining the chamber. The sheer force of her agony overwhelmed the magical glyphs. The golden rings snapped into sparks. She broke free. She shifted back to her human form before she even hit the ground, crawling desperately across the stone to reach him. Vigo lay gasping, his skin turning a sickly, pale shade of gray as the dragon venom worked its way toward his heart. "No, no, no," Odelia sobbed, pulling his head into her lap. Tears fell from her eyes. They were not normal tears. They were glowing, opalescent drops of liquid starlight. The tears landed directly on the weeping green wound in Vigo's stomach. A warm rush of life bloomed across his skin. The tears sizzled against the venom, neutralizing the poison instantly. The torn flesh began to knit together, closing the fatal wound, leaving only smooth, unblemished skin behind. As Vigo drew a deep, clear breath, the soul bond snapped fully into place. It clicked like a heavy lock turning in a bank vault. A shock wave of pure, invisible energy blasted outward from the two of them. The concussive force threw the traitorous Supreme Elder and his loyal guards backward, slamming them hard against the stone walls. Together, Vigo and Odelia rose, the king and the manticore. They moved in perfect lethal synchronization. Within moments, they dismantled the remaining guards securing the room in absolute silence. Chapter 8. Ash drifted through the air from the shattered windows. The smell of blood and ozone lingered heavily in the ruined bedchamber. Vigo stepped forward. His royal robes were ruined, torn and stained with combat, but his presence had never been more absolute. He walked over to where the Supreme Elder groaned on the floor. With one decisive stomp of his boot, Vigo brought his heel down on the Elder's fallen wooden staff. The wood fractured and splintered into useless pieces. He turned his back on the traitors. He walked to Odelia and pulled her firmly against his chest. The entire surviving court, who had rushed to the doorway hearing the commotion, watched the scene trembling in terror. Vigo dipped his head. He brushed aside the dark hair resting against her neck. His teeth grazed her jumping pulse point, a gentle promise before the claim. He bit down. A sharp grounding pain melted immediately into a wave of absolute belonging. The claiming was complete. Vigo lifted his head, his lips stained with a single drop of her blood. He turned his burning amber eyes to the gathered nobility in the hallway. "She is my mate," Vigo declared, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that promised death to anyone who disagreed. "She is the Luna of Obsidian. Whisper a single word against her, and I will burn this court down to the bedrock." No one dared to breathe. Above them, Barnaby fluttered down and landed squarely on Captain Garrick's armored shoulder pad. The bird cawed softly. Garrick merely sighed, accepting his new, highly chaotic life in the Royal Guard without complaint. Vigo turned Odelia in his arms. He backed her up against the edge of an overturned chair, uncaring of the mess surrounding them. The room was cold, but their kiss was a consuming, undeniable fire. She spent 18 years hiding who she was. And in the end, she didn't just survive the Alpha King's court, she changed it forever. But some truths come with a price, and not every scar can be seen. If her story touched you, don't let it end here. Subscribe, and tell me, would you have made the same choice?